Hi, my name is Amy Kalajian, and I am the graduate assistant for the Center for Career and Professional Development. And I'm going to be talking with you guys today on how to manage workplace conflicts. Always like to start the presentation off on just a quick little overview of what we're going to be talking about and just sort of some of the things we're going to be covering. First, we're going to be talking about what is workplace conflict. Um, then, why should we be learning to process through workplace conflict? Um, then, types of conflict, what to watch out for. We're going to talk about working towards conflict resolution. And then we're going to get into some scenarios that you guys are going to be working on. So, what is workplace conflict? Workplace conflict is defined as a state of discord caused by the actual or perceived opposition of needs, values, and interests between people working together. I really like this definition out of some of the others that I had seen because of three words. The actual or perceived part of the definition really stuck out to me because I think that the issue with conflict is miscommunication, a lack of information, or a level of ignorance towards other people's feelings or their backgrounds or their experience um, that really contributes to most types of conflict in most conflict situations at work. Um, but if you do your own research on conflict resolution, you might find that there are some varying definitions, but they all usually address the same general topics. But I would really recommend at this point in the presentation to just pause for a minute and jot down what you think workplace conflict means and what the definition of workplace conflict is. Because I think that this is one of the topics and one of the buzzwords that we really love to hear, but we never really define it for ourselves. Like, what is conflict to you? What does that mean? So just take a minute and write that down, and then go ahead and rejoin the presentation after you're done. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the importance of understanding and addressing workplace conflict. So being able to address and resolve conflict helps improve office culture. And most workplaces have a culture. It doesn't have to be an office. But there usually is a culture. There's usually an established feeling. People get into habits and we get into flows, and we like to have, I think, our comfortable spaces. And conflict can be so disruptive, and it can really foster a very toxic or inhospitable environment. And it doesn't encourage work. It can really make you feel unsteady or uneasy, and it can really take away your focus. But also, I think working through conflict really helps boost connections between your coworkers and yourself. Um, Really getting to know somebody centers so much around, I think, experiencing things together and having those connections. And you don't have to be friends with every single one of your coworkers, but I think it sort of helps develop an understanding of them. You know a little bit more about them. You can empathize with them. You can develop more of a respect. I think you can also develop more of a trust. I might not be friends with, Susie or Joe, but I know how Susie works. I know what's important to her. I know if I can come to her with a work related issue or a project, I know that she'll get this done. So I think it's really important to have those connections and be able to work through these things together as a team. It also improves your productivity and your output. Instead of focusing on, the conflict or the tension that the conflict is causing or building, you're able to focus on your work. You're able to focus on why you showed up that day instead of the other myriad of things. It also decreases tension and stress in the workplace. Referencing my first point, I think we all really want to be fulfilled by the work that we do. Oh, sorry about that. I think we also want to be happy at work. We spend so much of our time there. And we also work in some very high stress and high pace environments. Um, and I think the last thing that we all need is to be worried about conflicts between us and our supervisors, amongst other coworkers, amongst ourselves and other coworkers. So I think just being able to understand and address workplace conflict is so integral to creating a um, holistic and productive work environment. All right. And I would just take a couple minutes to think about, you know, what skills this might showcase when you're able to address workplace conflict. Um, for me, I really think that this is an opportunity to uh, show off some leadership skills, some empathy, and some emotional intelligence, and professionalism, and those soft skills that not everybody is able to teach or learn. Um, really being able to show off that you have these skills to address everyday issues and to address conflicts that really might take down a workplace is so important. It's also really important to practice now when the stakes are kind of low, rather than at work, rather than at like your first full-time serious job, and there's a major conflict between you and your supervisor or you and your coworkers, and you're not sure how to address it, and you're not sure, what to do or say. So I would just take a minute and think about, why is it important to you that you learn how to address workplace conflict? And then you can rejoin the presentation whenever you're ready. So moving on to types of conflict, personality clashes, leadership conflict, interdependency-based conflict, work style differences, and cultural-based dissension are sort of the 5 most common types of conflict that we see. Again, if you do some of your own research into conflict resolution, you'll see that some sources might call them different things. They might have more or less, but typically they're about 5. I like to start with personality clashes because I think that this is the one that we can most immediately think of. I think that this is one that people really commonly face. So personality clashes are conflicts based on the perception of someone's actions or character. So we always have that one person who we don't really get along with, or, you just might not have had a good interaction with them, or, something about their personality just rubs you the wrong way. I think it's kind of, uh, wishful thinking to think that we're going to be friends with everyone. Um, but I think it's so important to understand that you might not get along with everyone, but you still have to work with them well, and you still have to be professional. So being able to address personality conflicts are so important, because I think it can really dictate, personality dictates how we work with others, how we interact with others, others' perceptions of us. So I think that these are really important to understand and know how to work towards resolving. So then we have leadership conflict, which is conflict between workers and their supervisors' leadership style. I think leadership style is one of those things where we all have a preference, but sometimes we never talk about it or define it. So I think that, everyone has this idea of how they would want to handle, different situations, how they would want to lead, and what they expect out of their leaders or their supervisors. And these things can really contradict, and it can cause a lot of tension, especially if you as an employee feel like you're not being listened to, you're not being treated well, or something's very wrong in your office or your place of work. So the next one is interdependency-based conflict. Excuse me. So that's conflict based on your reliance of others. So we've all had that project where we've had to get it done by a very specific date, and you're waiting on, your coworker to finish their part of the project before they send it to you, so you can do your part and finish on time. And for one reason or another, that coworker isn't able to finish on time, and everything sort of dominoes. It's really hard to be able to work past that, or um, not feel incredibly frustrated that you have to depend on other people, because I think we all have a tendency to say, well, I can do it, I'll just do it. And we all hated group work projects in our undergraduate years. um, but being able to work with others, work towards a common goal, and sort of resolve those interdependency based conflicts, and being able to all be on the same page and have the same expectations, um, is really important. So then work style differences. This is conflict based on different styles of work or assignment completion. And I think the interdependency based conflict and the work style differences really go hand in hand. Because with work style differences, that I very much like to think of that as, you have the very structured person who's very neat, very organized, and then you have the other person who maybe isn't as organized, doesn't like structure as much, and it's just a little bit more free flowing. Um, the way I kind of think about this is people who need a calendar versus people who don't need a calendar, or who just don't want to have one. I'm definitely the kind of person who needs a calendar 110% of the time. I have multiple calendars, I put multiple things on them. It's so integral to me being able to complete my work. And there are other people who just don't need that. It always freaked me out when there were people who I was like, oh, I'll put something on your calendar. And they're like, oh, I don't have one. And it's just like, oh my God, what do you mean? Um, and these things might seem small, but if you are interdependent on somebody and their work style very much clashes with your own, it can be really hard to sort of get over that and to feel like you trust them enough to get their job done sometimes, because it might just feel so different from your own. So then we have cultural based dissension, which is conflict based on a difference in values, practices, traditions, or beliefs. And I think that this type of conflict is really sneaky, because I think that we like to imagine that we can very much compartmentalize our lives. Um, this whole idea of, well, I'm a different person at work, I'm a different person at home, and I don't bring anything personal to work. Um, I think that's a fallacy, because I think with cultural based dissension, um, so many of these things, your values, your practices, your traditions, your beliefs, are so central to who you are and what makes you you, that you can't help but bring it to work. And you can't help but sometimes have these major differences with people. And that sometimes bleeds into your work, and it might not mean to. Um, but, sometimes it can really impact you or those around you. Um, And again, I would say take a moment to pause this slide and reflect on instances where you might have seen or experienced maybe one or more of these types of conflict. Um, and have you seen these types of conflicts outside of work? And just to take a couple of minutes to jot down a couple examples and reflect on that, and then join the presentation when you're done. All right, so I think it's really important to talk about what to avoid before getting into some of the more tangible tips and tricks on what to do. So, what to avoid? First off, not admitting when you're at fault. And this is a really hard one. I think all of the advice in this presentation on the surface seems very simple and very easy, but I think a lot of this is really hard to actively integrate into your routine and become a habit. I think this can be very difficult, but that's the way you get good at something you practice. So, not admitting when you're at fault. This is a hard one, because I think we all immediately want to be defensive of ourselves. It never feels good to have failed at something, or to have not done well, or to have made a mistake. But being unable to admit when you're at fault is the quickest way to lose someone's sympathy and gain their frustration. I think it's so important to reflect on our actions, um, and, really say, like, did I mess up? And if I did, what can I do to fix it? I think it's always better. And you hear it so many times from different supervisors or different advisors, tell me if there's an issue, tell me if you messed up. Um, I think that's, a really good way to um, gain respect. Um, and really be avoidant of passing the buck and not being able to say, yes, I messed up. And also not tacking on, you know, oh, but, Susie so and so also messed up. I didn't get this part of the presentation from them. Um, really avoiding passing along that blame. Um, but I think, it is natural to want to defend yourself and, especially if you really weren't alone in a situation. Um, but this is really tricky. And I think it's really important to just take accountability for what you have control of, and really reflect on that. I think whenever you're in a situation where, something has gone wrong, what did I have control of and what could I have done differently? I think voice that and, you know, um, really reflect on what to improve. I think those are so important. So then the next one is speaking before you think. And I think this one is one that we're always a little bit guilty of, especially in a conflict where things are tense, it might get heated, and you're a little bit angry, and your filter between your brain and your mouth might be getting a little bit thin and a little bit frail. It's so easy just to say things in frustration or when you're emotionally upset or when stuff is going on around you and it's happening very quick and it's very tense and you just have to voice your opinion. I also think part of what plays into this issue is I think a lot of us feel pressure to do things immediately. We want to immediately communicate. We want to immediately hear about something. We want to immediately be in communication with someone. Through text or email or phone call, we sort of always want an answer now. But I think there's something to be said about being able to pause and reflect. What am I contributing with my words? What am I adding to this conversation? Am I adding anything meaningful to this dialogue? And that's always a good way to sort of gatekeep for yourself. Am I adding anything positive? Will what I am saying right now help someone? Will it help the situation, or will it make things worse? And that's always a good way to sort of help keep yourself in check, is asking yourself those questions. By saying this thing, what does it get me? So that's always something to, I think, really be cognizant of, is the effects of what you say before you say it. I think it'll also really help people respect you. And it'll help you look very measured and very reflective. I think that's always a good thing to be. So the next one is believing only your ideas count. Excuse me. And I think that this one is a little bit tricky because everyone immediately wants to say, oh, but I totally think that everyone's opinions count. But I also think it's so easy whenever we're in conflict with somebody, or whenever there's a lot of tension, or whenever you're frustrated, it's so easy to say, well, I don't want to listen to Susie. And poor Susie, I'm picking on her. I don't want to listen to Susie's opinion. I am annoyed with her and she doesn't do XYZ thing right in the office. So why should I listen to her opinion? But I think this is a really good time to, again, be really reflective and sit back and say, okay, Susie recommended I do this, or Susie had this opinion. Why does Susie have this opinion? She recommended this thing for this project, or she recommended that we work this way. Why? Um, and believing that somebody's opinions and ideas are valid doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means that you respect them and that you believe that they can have their own opinion, and that's okay. Differences in opinions are all right. It's fine to not agree with everybody all the time, but you still have to be able to work with them. So, moving into working towards conflict resolution, getting into some of the things that you should be doing. So, again, I think that on the surface, these look very simple and really easy, but they're really hard, I think. And again, they're really hard to integrate into your everyday habits. So, the first one that I always sort of recommend, and I am personally working on sometimes, is forgiving easily. Remind yourself that most conflict is not intentional. Obviously, use your discretion in the situation, but keep in mind that a lot of the conflict we have is because of misinformation, miscommunication, or a lack of information. Um, and really take that time to be empathetic, um, and really say, you know, all right, they didn't mean to do this. I won't hold a grudge, and we're going to move on and work together to resolve whatever this conflict may be. Um, it is easy to get caught up in frustrations and, to be angry with people. Because, again, I think we work in a lot of very high stress positions. And I think that a lot weighs on us when we're at work and we want to do a good job. It can feel very frustrating when there is somebody who you're in conflict with, and it might feel very, very personal. And it might feel like they're singling you out, and it might feel um, incredibly negative, and it might feel like you can never move past it. But I think being able to forgive is one of the first steps in being able to have a good, meaningful conversation that allows you to work towards some common ground and that allows you to be able to move on from the conflict whenever it is resolved. So, the next thing I would definitely recommend is embracing conflict. It's not a matter of if, but when. Um, Being able to um, not expect conflict, but be okay with conflict. And this doesn't mean being a doormat. This doesn't mean um, simply accepting ill treatment. It means being able to address it head on. And that's really hard for people. And it's really hard to feel um, like you're not tattletelling or, being annoying by, really trying to embrace and address conflict. And in a lot of situations, it can feel like it would just be easier to let it lie and not address it and avoid it and simply move on with your day. Um, I think my best advice for addressing and embracing conflict and really being okay with it is to simply realize that the living without the weight of that conflict, living without the weight of that stress, being able to go into work, into your um, place of work, is going to feel so much better than living or suffering through a conflict, no matter how small, no matter how meaningless it may feel. The temporary discomfort of having to address a person is outweighed by the benefit of having a productive conversation to resolve whatever conflict there may be. Um, and I think that the way to become more comfortable with addressing conflict um, and working on being more, I don't even want to say confrontational, but working on um, resolving conflict is when you accept that it will happen and working within it. You have to practice at it. And nobody's going to be perfect at having a discussion towards resolution. You're not in the United Nations. You're not a professional politician. Um, it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult to have these conversations, but the more you have them, um, the easier it will be. And I think one of the ways that we really work towards conflict resolution is talking together. Like I said, having these conversations. Um, One of the best tips I think I could ever give and have ever received is resist using accusatory statements. So, what I mean by that, instead of saying, you make me feel this way or you did this, try and replace those statements with, I feel this way, or when this happened, it made me feel blank. Um, or I experience a lot of stress because of blank situation. Um, Really switching that language and really being aware of how you speak um, is so important. A lot of people, when they hear you statements, you did this, you made me feel, they shut down. Again, it's getting back into the things to avoid, which is that accountability. A lot of people really struggle sometimes with owning up to, even if they did something wrong, owning up to that, especially if it feels like they're being attacked for it. So, really being considerate of language and language that will help foster dialogue is so important. And then on the flip side of that, listening carefully and focusing on what they're saying rather than your response. Um, a phrase I heard recently that kind of made me laugh, but really fit in well with this was, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. We should listen twice as much as we talk. And that's not to say that you cannot voice your opinion and you cannot have things to say, but really being able to listen to what people are saying, why they're upset, and what's motivating them, and how they feel in this conflict is very important. And they should be reciprocating that. One of the things that I would really recommend is echoing what this person is saying to you. And this is a really good trick to use in a lot of different parts of your life. Um, so, say you're working towards resolving a conflict with somebody, and they're expressing how this certain situation is making them feel or why they're frustrated. I think it's always really good whenever they're done is say, so what I'm hearing is, and repeat back to them what they said. And if you summarized it well and you're correct in what you repeated, they'll say, yes, no, that's exactly how I feel. And if you miss something, they might say, yes, and I also feel, you know, upset because of this. But this is always really a really good practice to get in the habit of, because it leaves no room for confusion, leaves no room for misinformation, and also helps the other person feel validated and feel heard. And I think that is such a great way to really practice listening and active listening. So the last thing is find agreement. Um, and you don't have to always agree 100% on the outcome. I think very rarely will people ever leave um, from some sort of resolution or some sort of conflict resolution feeling 110% happy. Both parties feel 110% happy about how things ended. The thing about compromise is usually no one's going to be 100% ecstatic about the results, because you're supposed to be giving something a little bit of something up. Each person should. But when you find agreement, at least find a common goal. At least find something that you both share that you want to work towards. And I would really recommend, if you decide to meet with somebody or discuss with the person one-on-one about resolving a conflict that you two have had, I would really start at the beginning of the meeting and, just say like, hey, at the end of this, I would really like to be able to do XYZ. I would really like to be able to get on the same page about how we're going to work on projects together. Um, and ask them, like, what do they hope to get maybe out of meeting with you and talking with you, and how to resolve that conflict? What do they expect? What would they like? Um, and then find the thing that you two share and work towards that. Um, I think it's so important to be able to at least leave knowing and feeling comfortable in the knowledge that you two agree on something, no matter how small. So now that we've talked about some of these strategies, I'm going to give you guys a couple scenarios. And I realize that this is recorded, so you cannot talk to a group, but if you're completing this for a class or for Degree Plus or for any other situation, maybe find somebody who's also going through the presentation with you and talk with them about it. So refer to the list of scenarios, and I can read a couple off, and you can pause whenever you're ready and jot down your response and why you chose that response. So, scenario 1. You get off on the wrong foot with a new coworker. They ask you for help responding to a customer inquiry, but you refuse to lend a hand because you're working on a tight deadline and don't want to waste time. There has been some tension between you two ever since, and now you need their help on a project, but they're not being very responsive. So go ahead, pause, and think about how you would deal with this scenario. All right. So, scenario 2. You're frustrated because your colleague in France, imagine you have a colleague in France, keeps messaging you at 5 a.m. your time. They send you seemingly urgent requests when you're sleeping or just waking up, and you're sick of being bombarded with 11 requests before you've ever sat down at your desk. You get the vibe that they don't like you very much, and you don't know how to approach them. Again, take a moment, pause, and think about how you would respond to the situation. And then the next 3 situations are going to be from more of a third person perspective. So you can either respond to these scenarios as a person in the scenario or as a supervisor or manager, whatever is most comfortable for you. Scenario 3. John has been the sales manager for over a year. His sales reports show an increase in sales, and he seems to know how to motivate his representatives pretty well. But a few of the reps repeatedly complain about John's management style. He tends to get very involved with their techniques, calls them out when he thinks that they are making a mistake, and doesn't take criticism himself very well. One of the top producing reps complains more than the others, and he's threatening to quit. How would you resolve this? So again, take a moment, reflect, and write down your advice. Scenario 4. Susan and Louise work in payroll. Susan is a devout Christian who always votes Republican and has religious figures in her cubicle. Louise is a professed atheist and liberal who feels that extremely religious people are less intelligent. Both women try to avoid discussing politics or religion, but they both know that the other's feelings on current events, and at times there is a palpable tension. One day, Susan comes to work wearing a shirt declaring support for a Republican candidate for political office, and Louise decides that she has had enough. She feels his action is alienating and hostile. She threatens to not only quit, but to sue the company for allowing a hostile work environment. Again, it's okay if you don't have clear-cut answers to some of these scenarios. Do your best to answer and to come up with a way that you would address them. All right, and for the last scenario, scenario 5, David has to do a presentation at work. There is one member that always makes sarcastic comments after his presentation, sarcastic off-topic comments after his presentation that make the other employees always laugh. David feels the comments are meant to undermine his authority. Their sarcastic coworker has a lower rank than David, but is not a subordinate and in another department altogether. How would you address this? So again, take a moment, rewind where you might need, and just go through and think about how you would either want to address these scenarios as someone in them or from a supervisory role, and just jot down some advice. All right, and then we're going to go move on to the conclusion. So just to provide a summary, addressing workplace conflict helps lead to a healthier and more productive work environment. It helps develop skills of empathy, understanding, and leadership. Conflict is inevitable. We need to know how to address it. It's just like any other part of our job. We practice, we work towards getting better, we make improvements where we can. This is such an important part of working in a team and going through life. There's always going to be conflict, and let's find out ways to better prepare ourselves for whenever it happens. Thank you guys so much for attending. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. You're also always welcome to come visit the Center for Career and Professional Development if you have any questions or need help with anything else. Please always feel free to reach out. Thank you.